Hi, I'm Christina Marie, and I'm reporting live for Access Sacramento, and we are at the Sacramento Asian Pacific Film Festival at the Sophia, the B Street Theater. And today I am here with Alexis Pan, and tell us what you do.
Yes, so I have been a volunteer with the Sacramento Asian Pacific Film Festival for about 6 years, and I help with the marketing and social media.
Fantastic. And isn't it interesting that we are finally getting to live stream some of our festival?
Yeah, it definitely is, and it's great for those who aren't able to be here with us, especially with the Q&A session and the panels.
Right. And so tell us a little bit about that. It's it's been since 2019, right?
Yes, so we were actually getting ready to go into the 2020 film festival when the pandemic hit, and so we had to put everything on hold, but we're so glad to be back again here today in 2022.
Fantastic. So we can further the conversation, right? And it's especially important right now because of the rise in Asian hate crimes. We do have a great panel coming up. You want to introduce that panel?
Yeah, so the panel is on Black and Asian solidarity, and it is so important in today's climate with what's happening out there. So I think it will be a great discussion for our community and just for everyone in general.
Great. So we're going to have the filmmakers from Reparations, Blurring the Colored Line, and that is going to be in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Vulnerable and tactful that film was, and she did it with such grace and elegance, and I think all of you would probably share in the same sentiments of the work that she did on that. I think I learned a lot. Did you? Some new things. So thank you so much, Crystal Kwok. She's actually in the house tonight. So you get a special appearance from her. She actually is based in Honolulu, Hawaii. Mahalo. I just got back from Hawaii too, so it's wonderful to have her on the mainland. And so thank you. And you know, the great thing about her is, if you don't know, she's actually was mentored by Jackie Chan. So I mean, that's just poured into her life. So what a great film. We have some very special guests with us here this evening, and for a discussion on race, identity, and the politics of belonging. And so I like to give the stage over to the next person, but I want to kind of give you some background on Miss Kelly Fong Rivas. If you don't know her, and the legend, the giant, the waves that she makes in the Sacramento community, she's been focused on advancing the racial equity, the public health and safety of our city. She's been a community organizer. She's contested for congressional campaigns. She's connected low-income families in the Latino community to resources for higher education. She's also promoted environmental causes. She sat in 2013 as the field director and deputy press secretary for California District 7 for Congressman Ami Bera. And she's also the founding member of the Global Shapers of Sacramento Hub, which actually include a worldwide community of exceptional young leaders that are chosen to be a part of the World Economic Forum, that they get selected. And she's also a former MC of the Sacramento Asian Pacific Film Festival. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for supporting this 2022 Sacramento Asian Film Festival this year. Make sure you hashtag film, take pictures. It's really important for us to get the word out here. I think we're definitely going to pack out the house next year. You want to calendar May 2023, because we'll definitely be doing this again. So please help me welcome Kelly Fong Rivas to the stage.
Thank you. Hi.
Oh, she's there.
That was such
thank
a
you. You're coming over
lovely
there.
introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, hello everyone. Can we do just another round of applause for both of our filmmakers for those two films? Thank you. I have the honor today of leading a very brief discussion and panel. I'd like to welcome our filmmakers to the stage who will be joining as a part of this panel. Crystal Kwok, whose film we just watched. If you please give her a large round of applause. I am actually fangirling and very excited to meet you right now. And John Osaki as well, who, if you were here earlier, you did also get to see his other film, Not Your Model Minority, coming onto stage. Thank you for joining. And on my right is a dear friend and woman that I've gotten to know over the years through very difficult times, who's local here with our community. I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Christy Haggins, who has created safe black circles and spaces here for our community in Sacramento. And since we have just such a short time together, I'm going to go ahead and get into it if we all want to take a seat. And hopefully provide a time to take a few questions from the audience as well. John, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. One of the things that I do now is working for the mayor of Sacramento. I've transitioned from being his chief of staff for the last 5 years to really leading on how do we advance racial equity together as a community, really center community. Part of that effort is building out a municipal reparations program. So your film was in particular very interesting. I was very grateful to be brought in today to help moderate this panel. Unfortunately, we are missing one panelist today that I was looking forward to talking with as well, Ms. Kim Mims, who really does work on this a lot as well. So John, the first question really is for you, and how did you come to choose this subject matter, right? Obviously your own sort of personal histories and lived experiences, but really what does it mean to you to produce a film on reparations for Black Americans as a Japanese American?
Sure. So, obviously this was a topic that I had to approach with a tremendous amount of humility, and I'm just very fortunate. So my organization, my day job, running a nonprofit in San Francisco, in the Japantown community, we have a decades-old history of serving young people from Japantown, but also the Black community and the Latinx community and every Asian ethnic community, and that is normal for us. And so I think that, through that work, I've been very fortunate to meet and work very closely with many of the Black leaders in San Francisco who you saw in the film, and I was just very grateful that they were willing to share this story. And really the lens that film was made through was trying to provide an accurate story about the Black reparations movement in a way where other communities can not only learn about it, but understand why they should care about it. And of course, my mother and father were both incarcerated during World War II, received reparations in 1990. And the one thing I want to just mention about that is, every member of the Black caucus in Congress, including Congressman Ron Dellums, supported reparations for Japanese Americans. And I want to point that out because I think it could have been very easy for some of them to say, what about us? What about the harm that has yet to be atoned for our community in this country? But at that time, they did not do that. They understood that this was a wrong that should be corrected, and they supported it overwhelmingly. And I think that when it came to discussing black reparations, the response from this country was silence, right? There was an unwillingness to even talk about it. And I think, so for myself as a Japanese American, there are many of us across the country who are trying to be allies in the black reparations movement to lift this up as something that other communities can and should support, because we remember that that our struggle for reparations would have never happened without the support of other communities.
Thank you for that. Brief follow-up. It's just for an active discussion with the two of you, getting a chance to watch John's film and hear this response, and really in context too with Crystal's film. Dr. Higgins, what's your feeling so far in terms of reflecting on this style of storytelling, right, from a different perspective, perhaps? We were just talking backstage of how often as minorities, right, we haven't seen our stories, we haven't seen ourselves on screens until we start to tell them ourselves. But here we now are moving into some spaces where we are learning how to share each other's stories, right, and those different cross-lived experiences. So I'm curious, from your perspective and learning that, and really your deep experience of how to create safe spaces for community that are either, you know, held close together and safe, or integrated, and watching that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm honored to be here and to have viewed the films and to offer my perspective. And I think, first of all, I just want to honor both of the filmmakers and the power of the vision of what you have created, and how much learning and growing I know I experienced as a result of being here today, and I hope that you all have as well. And I think part of the work that I do, just to give a little context, really is around addressing, I loved both films, but in particular the one focused on reparations specifically, that was so short, and yet gave a wonderful account of all the ways in which we can track systemic racism and how it impacts Black communities in particular. And so because of that, as a person who is an African-centered psychologist and a community healer, I'm definitely around how does this impact our community as Black people. And yet I also see true value in being able to see the ways in which we're all integrated and interconnected with the unfortunate history of white supremacy and how it shows up in our society now. And being able to recognize the historical and the contemporary connections is really, really important. And so for me, I see huge value in us being able to have these kind of mixed conversations, being able to talk kind of cross-racial ethnic groups about this history, while also being able to say, yeah, and it's super complex, and the realities of what we may have each experienced in terms of our backgrounds is significant and is real. And so being able to do that both and, right, that education about our own respective backgrounds and histories, but also seeing how they are integrated in these unfortunate ways that still harm us is important as well. And I think there is healing in these conversations, while they can also be really difficult at the same time.
That was very beautifully said. There is a lot of healing in these types of conversations, as uncomfortable as they can be. I know especially within our Asian American communities, it's something growing up of mixed ethnicity. You can guess by my name, Kelly Fong Rivas, gives it away a little bit. But just like Crystal had talked about, you know, in Chinese culture and growing up and seeing, you know, in Cantonese as well, it just is, women are very much taught not to speak up, right, about these things that we see. But we're also very observant in these spaces too, and how do we cater to people. And it's one thing that I think Crystal has done very well with her storytelling and filmmaking, is combining some of those lived experiences and culture in a way that actually you've been able to observe in ways perhaps others might not have noticed some of these different things you've drawn out in your filmmaking. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit to one of the very first opening questions in your film was, what did it mean to grow up Chinese in a Black and white space? And really, I'm curious after rewatching your film. I'm sure you've seen it so many different times in many different ways and how you've wanted to create it and critiques here and there, but watching it again alongside John's and within this context, is there anything that's come out that's new for you observing it or that you really want to reemphasize for our audience today?
Thank you, and that's kind of a loaded question, so let me see how I begin to unpack that. My journey has been as complicated as the topic, as you can imagine. I started this project about 5 years ago, starting from a very personal perspective, thinking it was just going to be a small story about my grandmother and her life growing up in the Deep South. But as life goes, things come to you, and they shape things. Larger power forces kind of take control of your narrative, specifically when Black Lives Matter happened a couple of years ago, and then immediately after was the anti-Asian hate. And so I can remember my process of transforming from a very simple personal story to something that was much larger, and I had the responsibility to address, and I needed to do a lot more research and understanding. See, I grew up. I spent a lot of my adult life in Hong Kong, and so I come from a perspective that's not necessarily just Asian American. I think it's more transnational in that. It's a global issue. It's not just an American problem, right? Racism and colorism. And I wanted to apply that lens and to look in it from a side window, if you will, into a house. And this maybe comes from my feminist studies influence in looking at things from a different angle, in how personal stories actually reveal a lot more about history. You know, we have many good, great works like John's, and what is interesting is that the fact that we're all here, and when I rewatched it, to your question, is that watching it after John's film, there were very similar parallel stories told in very different ways, and that's the beauty of the connectivities, but it's also the problematics that we are all addressing in different ways, and I think that the fact that we're talking about this being both uncomfortable and beautiful in the connectivity is exactly what we're talking about here, the tensions of needing to embrace the past, but at the same time, admiring these wonderful little secret stories. And I'm gonna reemphasize my interest in intimate histories because I think that's very, it's not told. And for me, as a woman looking at spaces that maybe these women have historically been silenced because they didn't get a chance to tell their stories. And what does a secret date reveal? It reveals a lot, and that's where I went with it. And I hope that from my personal angle, I was able to open up a different entrance into history and to see things that we don't normally learn in history books because we don't learn enough in history books, and we need to kind of educate. We have to redo the whole education system, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, that's my answer.
Amen. I think you're seeing a lot of nodding heads probably in the audience as well. It gets to that storytelling as well, right? We don't appear in the history books. We don't appear beyond the census counts within, advertisements and other things, right? So we have learned not to see ourselves there. How do we share our stories through that? And it's across cultures, right? And so it's who has the power to write and share history and tell those stories. I think it's beautiful the ways in which you are reclaiming that. You brought a very important point forward. That's something that's been key in a lot of the reparations discussions across the country, whether it's developing municipal reparations to inform a federal level discussion, or like what's happening with the California statewide task force. And one of those things is the importance of getting to those very personal stories, right? Those histories that aren't captured, getting that oral narrative. And that's something I'd like to also encourage our audience as you go home and speak with your families and your elders that are still alive and with us today. What are those types of questions that you could be asking them like you saw in these films, right? To better understand what was it like growing up in your neighborhood? Where did you sit? Absolutely, please.
I just wanted to add that one of my family members is actually in the audience tonight, and this afternoon, and I'm very honored to have my Uncle Arthur here, who lives in Sacramento. Uncle Arthur,
Hi,
he's
Uncle
one of
Arthur.
the last siblings of the Lum family,
Oh.
and I remember this process of all of our family contributing these personal stories and putting ourselves out there, and to it's quite tough to address this the idea of anti-blackness, and I just appreciate you and everyone who's supported the film. So thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you for being here, Arthur. That's a really great segue into one of the next questions that really is open for all of you who would ever like to respond. Do you feel that we actually have more in common with one another after creating and or watching this film? And I want to ask the audience this question first by a quick show of hands. Do you feel like we have more in common together after watching this film? Show of hands, yes. With one another, just in this room, right? Okay. We'll come back to another audience participation question that follows up on this one, I promise.
Well, I'll take a stab at that. So something that I do think is important for us to acknowledge is that there's really, with regard to Asian Americans, right, there are the pre-1965 immigrants of Asian descent that have a tremendous amount in common with the black community in terms of racism, in terms of the exclusion laws that were passed to keep Asians out of this country, keep them from owning property. Those experiences are very distinct. And I think what's so important and often gets lost in these conversations is that then we fast forward to the 1960s and the Black freedom movement, the civil rights movement, that actually led to the 1965 Immigration Act that reopened the doors to Asian immigration into this country. And so you have the pre-1965 Asian immigrants, and then you have the post-1965 immigrants who actually know very little about that history, about those experiences. The post-1965 Asian immigrants were brought over because they had skills that the white power structure wanted in this country, not because there was a altruistic motive involved, but they wanted specific skills in this country, and so that was the Asians that were allowed to immigrate into this country. And so their views are just very different, their experiences are very different, and so I think that part of the work ahead that we have, especially in the Asian American community, is to educate ourselves, is to have these hard conversations within our community. I loved Crystal's film. It was very honest, right? It was very honest in terms of the perspectives that it provided, and I think that there needs to be more of that in this country. You know, my film, prior to this panel, Not Your Model Minority, we've just got it. We've just added Chinese subtitles to a version because we want to bring it to the immigrant community so that we can have these discussions, not just amongst, those of us who have been here for multi-generations, but also those who are newcomers.
Thank you, and it is something I think we all notice generationally as well, right? And you drew that out in your film as well. It's something I know I've seen within my own family. Those terms weren't new to me, hearing them. I do remember the first time that I did hear the translation because, right, assimilating as Chinese American, we didn't grow up with Cantonese beyond like wash your hands and brush your teeth. So when I did hear the translation of what soy sauce chicken meant, I remember being so shocked that it was something so casually thrown around and recognizing that as a generational thing. Any follow-ups for that one before I move on to our next?
I guess I want to offer that I'm having a mixed reaction, right, as a person of African ancestry and witnessing and understanding some of the assumptions that have been made about me and my people. And so while when you ask the question about feeling closer, it's like, yeah, right, there's a better understanding, and that there's another part where it kind of stabs, right? It feels like, damn, right? I knew it, we know it, and to see it and to hear it is painful. And so I just want to give voice to that there's a very mixed reaction. Again, as a Black person and having this conversation and what you were raising around the issue, that the generational place for sure, but the idea of how Black folks really supported the efforts, and yet we still don't have reparations, right? And so I had an opportunity actually to testify before the Department of Justice for part of the California Reparations Task Force. and was speaking to much of, again, what was presented in some of your film, your coverage in your documentaries. And it's just real. The idea of these issues still being very present and prevalent for us, for all of us. But in particular, I'm thinking about the Black community, thinking, of course, the recent both anti-Black and anti-Asian hate. But that's very present in my consciousness right now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It gets into, oh yeah.
I just wanted to add a little bit more that I totally agree, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I've tried to have these conversations, and when I hear from the Chinese community saying, oh, it was so symbiotic, it was so mutual, it wasn't. There was a hierarchy involved within these different communities, even within our own, and so to really address these uncomfortable conversations, we need to dig deep. It's not just being here. It takes a lot of work, and I think we're just beginning, we're just scratching the surface, so. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I was also trying to see what hand signal I'm getting. I got a 5-minute. Thank you. And thank you for raising that, because it really does get into that sort of the next question that I wanted to invite for our audience to participate in again, which is, and I teed you up a little unfairly in the first one about, does it make us feel closer together? Because I know for me and for our audience and sitting here, it was pretty uncomfortable, and it did bring up exactly these things, right, that are painful to hear. And I actually was sitting and feeling a little bit ashamed, right, of my own culture and family and proximity to whiteness and those privileges, right, and what that feels like, especially within mixed company and being able to walk into these spaces or not. And I'm just wondering, you know, since this is a demonstration of how vulnerable we can be, these, you know, how important it is to be honest, to have these conversations with one another. How many of you in the audience were feeling more like that instead of closer together after watching these films? A few. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and your honesty. And knowing that we have just a few moments left, I would like to just one last question for each of you to answer. What advice do you have, given your experiences, being in these spaces, making these films, working through these types of topics, being able to speak your truths, right, and families' truths to power? What advice do you have for our audience today as they go back out in the world with your stories and words?
I'll just do a quick one. Again, uncomfortable conversations, what does that mean? We can start from a very small space. We can go home and have dinner with our family and just speak to one person or your family and discuss these things, how we felt, if it's intergenerational, if it's whatever your context of your background is that shapes the way you feel, to discuss it. Because if we don't start addressing and kind of turning inwards in how we are shaped and how we do view things and why we have these slanted lenses, it's not going to go anywhere. And to educate and learn each other's histories, that's another thing I think we need to do deeply. And we can't blame I did earlier blame the education system, but we also can't blame ourselves. We need to we have to do the work. So that's just my 2 cents.
So I would just encourage everybody to not just have conversations, but to act. I mean, for myself, I mentioned earlier that, you know, this was a very difficult topic to take up as an Asian American filmmaker, to make a film about the Black reparations movement. But I felt it needed to be done because it was a way in which I could educate large numbers of communities about why this issue is so important. I do want to just mention really quickly that my colleague on the Stop Repeating History team, Don Tamaki, is the only non-Black member of the California Reparations Task Force. And he had a lot of anxiety putting himself out there, being a voice, an ally on an issue that is so sensitive and is so multi-layered. But he felt it was so important as somebody whose family was once incarcerated by this country, who received reparations, that he felt he needed to be a voice to speak out in support of the Black community. So I just wanted to encourage everybody to act and to take steps to lift up other communities, because that's where I believe we have the most power as communities of color.
Thank you, and I would echo what both of them have already said. I think all of that is really critical. As a psychologist, however, I want to make sure to encourage each one of us to do our own personal work. That yes, the conversations and talking with others is critical, but just doing that own personal self-assessment, like what do I believe? Where does that come from? How does that impact how I show up in the world? How I interact with other people who look like me or who don't? And so that would be one thing I would definitely encourage you to do. And then the next step is keep learning and support HR 40. If you don't know more, what that is, look into that. Do your research, explore this, this concept of reparations, particularly for the Black community, because we have not gotten our 40 acres or our meal. So with that, I say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One more big round of applause for all of our panelists, please. Thank you. And if you will indulge me for one moment so we can do a stage selfie with all of you in the audience. I promised my mother I would do this. Okay, everyone, look alive. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. What a wonderful panel discussion. And thank you to Kelly Fong Rivas. Her position currently is she's the first racial equity advisor to the mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg's office. So it's wonderful to have her in the room and in the house tonight. I always encourage all of you to network with one another. You have some living legends amongst you. So definitely, say hello to them. They're not bashful at all. They love to get a chance to say hello. So right now, what we'll do is, thank you so much, Kelly, for that panel. And folks, what we'll do is we'll do a 10-minute break. Tech needs some time to get some things in order for our next event. So this is ending our screening number 3. In 10 minutes when we get back, we'll be starting screening number 4, and it'll be our last screening of the evening. And then you want to stick around because we do have some really fun surprises, and I love that. There's some things that you don't know and we did not share intentionally because we just want to love on you when you are here with us tonight. So restrooms are all the way down to the very front door, and then to the left, there should be, the full bar is still open for you, and there's coffee, still drinks,